Hey guys, how's it going? This is Kevin Asani, and you are watching the Progressive Square. Thank you so much for joining me. We've got a pretty interesting show today. We're going to be covering some of the stuff that happened at the debate and stuff and everything. So, I gave most of my takes during the debate, or really after the debate, and during the breaks of the between the debate, during the commercials of the debate. So, but I want to give a little bit more in-depth thoughts on what I thought happened that stood out to me, and then a couple of other topics that I wanted to touch on as well. But before we get started here, don't forget to check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/ProgBlacksmith. If you can become a patron and give me a generous contribution, it would be greatly appreciated. Also, for more information about this podcast, check out #TheProgSquare on Twitter. That will direct you to all of my live broadcasts on Periscope, as well as every segment I do, every segment I post on YouTube. All right, so let's get things started here. So the first part of the show, I wanted to, or at least the first segment I want to do here, is going to focus on part of the debate that happened regarding Joe Biden. And he received a lot of a big bulk of the questions that, obviously because he was he's the guy that's polling the highest in the among all the 10 or 20, 10 candidates on stage, and then in general, just over more than 20 candidates in the race, he's polling above all of them. So he definitely gets the most attention for sure, and he is also not doing really well. Regardless of his standings in the polls, he seems to be basically faltering with each debate. We've had 3 debates so far, and he's pretty much he started off the first debate was terrible, second debate was just as bad, and this past debate I wouldn't say was as bad, and I didn't consider him to be a loser of that debate, but he had his usual gaffes and everything, so he just didn't do as bad as all the other ones, so the other 2 that he was in. So obviously, the bar is very low for people that I think progressives that are watching Joe Biden. I don't know about other Democrats out there, but I think for progressives, the bar is pretty low, and we pretty much assume a gaffe out of him, regardless of what happens here. But in this this particular part that I want to point out to you guys, he gives his take on healthcare, and this was obviously a big issue. Definitely a big issue among all progressives and the Democratic Party, and it's obviously a big issue in the debates as well. So this was the first topic that was covered, and pretty much out of the gate, everybody obviously voiced their take on healthcare and our healthcare system, and as usual, Joe Biden felt the need to dick ride Barack Obama and attach himself at the hip at Barack Obama, because he knows that that's going to help him get the most votes. And in this part of the debate, he basically made that as clear as possible. So I don't want to give too much away. Let me play the clip here first, and then we'll discuss our basically his what he says here after the video. Here, check it out.
And Vice President Biden, the differences between you and the senators on either side of you tonight strike at the heart of this primary debate. Both Senators Warren and Sanders want to replace Obamacare with Medicare-for-all. You want to build on Obamacare, not scrap it. They propose spending far more than you to combat climate change and tackle student loan debt, and they would raise more in taxes than you to pay for their programs. Are Senators Warren and Sanders pushing too far beyond where Democrats want to go and where the country needs to go?
That'll be for the voters to decide that question. Let me tell you what I think. I think we should have a debate on health care. I think, I know that the senator says she's for Bernie. Well, I'm for Barack. I think the Obamacare worked. I think the way in which we add to it, replace everything that's been cut, add a public option, guarantee that everyone will be able to have affordable insurance, number one. Number two, I think we should be in a position of taking a look at what costs are. My plan for health care costs a lot of money. It costs $740 billion. It doesn't cost $30 trillion. $3.4 trillion a year, it turns out, is twice what the entire federal budget is. That's before it exists now, without interest on the debt. How are we going to pay for it? I want to hear tonight how that's happened. So thus far, my distinguished friend, the senator on my left, has not indicated how she pays for it. And the senator has, in fact, come forward and said how he's going to pay for it, but it gets him about halfway there. There's a lot of other things that need to be done. I have a bold plan to deal with making sure we triple the money for at-risk schools that are Title I schools from 15 to $45 billion a year. But I go down the line, and each of the things we're talking about, I lay out how I can pay for it, how I can get it done, and why it's better.
So first of all, before we get to Biden's terrible response, just listen to the framing of that question. I mean, typical corporatist, neoliberal, mainstream media bullshit. George Stephanopoulos claims that Bernie Sanders' plan, or Elizabeth Warren's plan, essentially, the progressive idea for healthcare, wants to, quote, scrap Obamacare. And I think he might have said start all over, essentially. That's so ridiculous. That is not even close to what progressives want to do, Bernie Sanders wants to do. That is not the plan at all. So, I mean, he's just, lobbing a softball, right straight up the plate to Joe Biden. And in typical Joe Biden fashion, he pretty much swings and misses. Probably does. I think in many cases he doesn't even really swing because he just flubs it so badly, and he just lets it go right by him. And then he talks about how his health plan is so much better, and that Bernie Sanders' plan only goes halfway there. I don't know what he's talking about. He doesn't even get into the details of it. He might have later on, but I mean, I don't remember anything when I covered it live. But in that response alone, it's just terrible. I mean, he's not making any goddamn sense. He's totally talking out of his ass. I think he starts talking about like at-risk youth in schools and Title X programs and stuff. Like, what does that have to do with healthcare? And it seems like George Stephanopoulos' question was kind of strange in the way that he was bringing up other issues. Oh, you're gonna, how you guys are gonna, the different candidates are gonna address climate change and healthcare and stuff. Like, just stick to one subject. Like, you were talking about healthcare, all of a sudden you talk about climate change. He's trying to say that like all the other plans, the framing of the question, as bad as it already was to say like as if like whatever Bernie Sanders and whatever Elizabeth Warren want to do is so radical, and what you want to do, Vice President Biden, is totally logical and makes a ton of sense. So, I mean, that's obviously ridiculous when you look at the actual substance of what he wants to offer. And this is something that the Cenk Uygur of TYT mentioned in an interview he did on The Hill, The Rising. It's this show hosted by Crystal Ball and this other guy, I forgot his name. But it's a pretty good show. But they brought on Cenk Uygur, and he was mentioning how all of a sudden Democrats think that the public option is the next best thing since sliced bread. They pretend like as if, oh my God, the public option, wonderful idea. So now what did they think in 2008, 2009, 2010-ish, when initially healthcare was being debated under the Obama administration and by President Barack Obama? They thought the public option was too far. They went and asked people like Joe Lieberman and, the people in the Senate, Republicans, obviously got their input because obviously the Democrats care so much about what Republicans think, apparently. And they tried to get their input, and obviously the input of the corporate Democrats. Like I said, Joe Lieberman being one of them, who was an independent, actually, not even a Democrat. He actually switched from Democrat to independent, still caucused with the Democrats, but he was still, not part of the party, which is funny considering how they consider, Bernie Sanders to not be a Democrat, and they don't take any of his advice. They pretend to, but they trash him constantly. They never did that with somebody like Joe Lieberman. But I digress from that. But the point is that when they were debating this issue, the issue of healthcare, when it was going on in during that kind of 2009, 2010 period, they hated the public option. They couldn't stand the idea of the public option. In fact, what was his name? Rahm Emanuel, who's ironically he's a contributor for ABC News now, and he's going on there and spewing a bunch of corporate nonsense. He's the former mayor of Chicago, by the way, but he was the chief of staff under Barack Obama when he was in office. I think he was there for 2 years or 4 years, I think. So just kind of like a portion or maybe all of the first term of Barack Obama. But certainly within the first 2 years of Obama's term, Rahm Emanuel was making a ton of noise when it came to how much he hated progressives. He couldn't stand them. He was constantly smearing, trashing, shitting on progressives, calling them, at one point he called them retarded or something. It was totally weird. And this guy just hated progressive ideas. His disdain for them was, it was something else, man. I couldn't believe it. I mean, a lot of progressives at the time, because we thought Obama was, truly going to be like this progressive kingpin, and he obviously didn't turn out to be anything close to that. And we were just like, people like us were like, that's so strange, like this guy shitting on progressives, but okay, well, maybe Obama's still going to do the right thing. What does Obama end up doing? Doesn't do anything close to even the public option. He gives that right away because he wants to give into the demands of the Republicans, who didn't end up supporting Obamacare anyway. So even when Obama did what he wanted to do for the Republicans to try and appease them and try and get them on his side, still didn't work. They still hated Obamacare. They still smeared it, and idiots like Rahm Emanuel still chastised progressives as pushing a purity test and all this bullshit. So, I mean, the presidency of Barack Obama was such a ridiculous roller coaster of just capitulation, of weakness, and appeasing of right-wingers. And honestly, that's what Joe Biden is going to do too. And when you're going out there and you're pushing an idea of a public option, you're not even going halfway. That's not even halfway. That's like a quarter of the way. Halfway would be Medicare for all. Halfway would be I think in the mind of, I would say in the mind of progressives, I think halfway would definitely be Medicare for all. And that just kind of depends, just because it depends on is it private funding of public institutions, public funding of private institutions, and there's different variations. So I mean, the actual going past whether you're going to go to the left or the right of the middle ground, and I'm saying left or right isn't this political spectrum. If you're going to go to the left or the right of the middle ground, which is Medicare for all, it depends on how you're going to do it. Because it's going to be better. It's better if you're going to do public funding of public institutions, because there's going to be less of a profit motive in it, and various countries out there like UK and France and I think Germany and whatnot, Canada, they all have those different variations. It's kind of hard to remember which ones are which. I think if one of my friends told me that the best system, I believe, is the French system, because they have a public funding of public institutions. But don't quote me on that. There's so many, I can never, public, private. It's really hard to keep up with. So, but either way, the middle ground for progressives is Medicare for all. Because if we don't get Medicare for all, then we're going to go out there and just end up getting, nothing pretty much. We're going to end up getting a bullshit plan that's going to end up being, a horrible, capitulation, and it's going to end up being something that is not going to end. It's not going to help people, and we're going to end up just giving into whatever the right wingers and the Republicans want. And when it comes to pushing for policies like this, when it comes to really progressive policies, in my opinion, and I think also in the opinion of a lot of other progressives, you have to push for the furthest left idea and the furthest progressive, furthest left policy. You can't go out there and be like, okay, I'll do the public option, and then I'll do a buy-in for Medicare and Medicaid, blah, blah, blah. No, you got to go in there and you have to say Medicare for all, single-payer system, however you want to put it. But you basically have to push for that as much as possible, the furthest left position as possible. I mean, look at what the Republicans do. Look at what the right-wingers do. They push for the most right-wing positions ever, and what do they end up getting? They end up getting capitulation from the Democrats. And the Democrats, at the fucking best, a lot of times they'll get some sort of so-called middle ground, and it's not even really middle ground. It's like the middle ground of the right wing spectrum. I mean, look at policies like Obamacare. Look at immigration. Especially under Nancy Pelosi right now with Trump, giving him all he wants when it comes to immigration policies, and talking about how there's children in cages and stuff. If you apparently care so much about children in cages, but then you go out and you give Trump everything he wants, and I mean, those are just a couple of examples. Not even pushing for like any kind of living wage or even a $15 minimum wage, nothing like that. So Democrats are just typical weak ass bitches essentially, and they never do anything that is actually going to be fighting for progressive causes or progressive issues. Everything is going to come down to doing what those donors want, what those lobbyists and those donors want. And truth be told, the donors and the lobbyists that control the Democrats are largely the same ones that control the Republicans, especially when you look at corporatist, centrist, not even centrist, right-wing Democrats in a lot of cases. Those idiots are being controlled by the same people that control the Republicans. So it's they're being the strings that are pulling these puppets are all the same people. They're all the same entities and all the same donors and everything. So it's really pathetic how Joe Biden is still leading in this race. The fact that he's considered a electable candidate and talking about his electability, like it's just a total like myth and like bullshit conversation that just means nothing really. It's based on the fact that he has name recognition. That's all it is. And obviously, as many of you know, Bernie Sanders has name recognition. But he's too far left and he's too far whatever to the radical side, and we can't have him. But no, we love Joe Biden. So if you look at the framing of the question from Stephanopoulos, it was already bad enough, and it was a total softball for Joe Biden, and he swinged and missed badly because he's an idiot and he's a dunce and he can't make any like actual coherent arguments. There was later in the debate he's talking about how kids have to they have to be listening to their record players or something. It was such an embarrassing performance for him. But like I said, the standards were so low, the bar is so low for this guy that it's like, unless he goes in there and just completely flubs the entire debate, then it can be seen as a loss for him. But to his credit, he was, going after a couple of people here and there, and he was like purposely going over his time because he's saying everybody else is going over the time. So, I'm going to keep going after everybody, blah, blah. So he was just kind of like showing this kind of anger all of a sudden. I mentioned at the end of the debate how he was just like so angry, he couldn't even tell what the hell he was angry about. So, Biden, I don't think he lost though. I just think he just, did enough to just not lose pretty much, because there was so many other candidates that did so much worse than him, and I'm going to be getting to them in a second here. But Biden is hopefully his numbers keep falling, his poll numbers. I heard there was polls showing that Bernie Sanders is catching up to him in New Hampshire. I think even passing him in New Hampshire. I don't know about Elizabeth Warren, but Bernie Sanders is right on the coattails of Joe Biden. So the people that want to ignore that, they can keep ignoring Bernie, and they can keep denying his momentum. But he is in this race, and he is moving up there, and Biden should be getting paranoid pretty soon. I think that's going to be, I think by the next debate, Biden is going to start getting really, really worried about where his standing in the polls are and where his lead in all the different states and national polls has gone. So one person that definitely botched this debate badly was Amy Klobuchar. Now, she was the person that was, I believe, on the furthest left side, or from her vantage point, the furthest right side of the debate stage, and that's a very fitting place for her, not only because of her shitty poll numbers, but when it comes to Klobuchar, she is a utter embarrassment. And this lady she is stuck in the past. She is like, when it comes to her ideas, especially when it comes to healthcare, and this is going to be her kind of I don't know, her point of view on healthcare, and it's so stuck in the fucking 1990s, so stuck in the days of like the typical, corporatist, centrist Democrat positions that was so, popular because it was made popular by Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton and various other corporatist type candidates. Back in the 90s, that shit was huge. Now, like, everybody's just laughing at these centrists. Nobody takes these centrists seriously, unless you're obviously part of that clan. But, if you're not, you don't, you just laugh at them. You're like, yeah, these people are clowns. So case in point here for Amy Klobuchar. So why don't you check out this clip, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
Senator Klobuchar, you said in your opening statement you want to represent the people stuck in the middle of the extremes. Who represents the extreme on this stage?
I think you know that I don't agree with some of these proposals up here, George. So I'm talking
Which
about
ones?
if I could respond to some of the proposals from my friends. First of all, Senator Sanders and I have worked valiantly to bring down the cost of pharmaceuticals. That was a Klobuchar-Sanders amendment to allow for drugs to come in from less expensive countries like Canada. We have worked to bring down the cost by fighting to allow 43 million seniors, that's a bill I lead, to negotiate for better prices under Medicare. I figure that's a lot of seniors and they should be allowed to get a better price. But when it comes to our health care and when it comes to our premiums, I go with the doctor's creed, which is do no harm. And while Bernie wrote the bill, I read the bill. And on page 8 of the bill, it says that we will no longer have private insurance as we know it. And that means that 149 million Americans will no longer be able to have their current insurance. That's in 4 years. I don't think that's a bold idea. I think it's a bad idea. And what I favor is something that what Barack Obama wanted to do from the very beginning, and that is a public option, a nonprofit choice that will bring down the cost of insurance, cover 12 million more people, and bring down the prices for 13 million more people. That is a bold idea.
Okay, that's not a bold idea. You're just pushing for the same exact thing that Barack Obama wanted, and Barack Obama couldn't even fucking do it. He couldn't even fucking push it. He didn't even end up doing it. He ended up pushing for the individual mandates. So when you talk about Barack Obama pushing for the public option, that's completely ridiculous. Talking about listen, these people are trying to do their best, and Amy Klobuchar is going to be out of this race in. I would say before the next debate. She's going to be out in like 2 to 3 weeks at the most. She is she's an utterly clueless politician. Like, she doesn't know what she's doing. She's just like making noises with her mouth, saying a bunch of ridiculous things, and then, pretending as if it's like totally edgy and totally like, oh yeah, I've got these great ideas that are in favor of progress and in favor of improving our healthcare system, and he's talking. She frames it in the same exact fucking way that Joe Biden does. Talk about, oh, this is gonna get rid of Obamacare, dude. The fucking Medicare-for-all bill, single-payer healthcare, is an advancement upon Obamacare. Nobody is going to get kicked off of first of all, nobody's going to get kicked off their insurance within the 4-year period that Medicare-for-all / single-payer is going to be implemented. If Bernie Sanders is president, it's going to be people are still going to have their Obamacare insurance. I mean, nobody's going to get acting as if people are going to get kicked off. Listen. They're saying these things to fearmonger about Medicare for all. They're trying to go out there and trying to scare people, especially older people who supposedly love their insurance. In reality, they're the ones that have Medicare. So I don't know why. I don't know, because this is a constant thing of trying to scare older people who are boomers and stuff. To be fair, do the boomers have Medicare? Maybe some of them do. But I mean, in a lot of boomers, maybe some boomers don't have it, and they have to rely on insurance, right? And those people, they're trying to scare the shit out of them. And particularly idiots like Klobuchar are trying to do that. And she's trying to go out there and talk about how, this wonderful idea that President Obama pushed for, no, that he did not push for that. So that's completely ridiculous. That's a lie. That's a fucking lie right there. That's 10 Pinocchios if you want to use the standards of the clowns at the Washington Post. But yeah, that's 10 Pinocchios right there, because that's bullshit. And then talking about how a bunch of people are going to be kicked off of it, 140 million people are going to be kicked off their insurance. That's not true. That's fear mongering, and that's just putting out a bunch of misinformation and lies and trying to scare people and pretend as if Medicare-for-all / single payer is not an advancement and a better, obviously much better version of Obamacare, which was a right-wing idea that was pushed by the Heritage Foundation, and Richard Nixon and Mitt Romney made it law in Massachusetts when he was governor. So and the Republicans pushed for it in Congress in the 90s in opposition to Hillary Clinton's universal health care ideas. So, and that was in the 90s when she was first lady. So, yeah, no, you're a liar, and you're not making any sense, and you're not convincing anybody to support you or vote for you with this kind of bullshit. And like I said, she is still stuck in that 1990s corporate Democrat, button-up politician, non-controversial, over the top, whatever you want to call it, over the top. But I'm saying like very kind of like measured type politician that doesn't want to they don't want to cause any waves. They want to make everything, they want to keep everything to a minimum and not be too over the top to the point that they're like going to piss off their donors and they piss off their, the heads of the party who are going to, chastise them for daring to push anything so-called radical, which is not even radical. And whatever, she talks about how her and Bernie Sanders got together to push for legislation that lowered drug prices, pharmaceutical drug prices, so the drugs that were received from Canada. So yeah, that's a good thing. I mean, I don't hate on you for doing something good, but don't use that as some sort of like jumping off point to be like, yeah, that is the reason why I would be wonderful for pushing for a public option. And then not even pushing for something that's like progressive, and she claims it's fucking progressive. That's the worst part, though. She goes out there and she puts out all these so-called bold ideas, and then she's like, yeah, it's totally progressive. What is it? It's something that Barack Obama couldn't even do. And then somehow you think that you're pushing for something that should have, honestly, the public option should have been implemented 10 years ago under Barack Obama. You're claiming to want to do that now, and you're claiming that it's more progressive than what Bernie Sanders wants to do. I mean, that's absolute madness. How can you say that? Because obviously either you don't know what the idea of progressive is, or you're just co-opting the term, which is what I've complained about many times in the past, and told a lot of other people that they've kind of like sworn off the label of progressive. But you're trying to co-opt the progressive label to pretend as if that's what you believe, and then you put out all these policies that are not progressive. So she just focuses on the label. So she wants to put the label out there and say, this is this is what I am. I'm a progressive. But and then she thinks that she follows that up with any idea that she puts out there. She could say like, look, I'm pushing for it and I'm a progressive, so that means all my ideas are progressive. So she's dumbing it down for all the fucking idiots out there. And I have seen plenty of people, believe it or not. Granted, I haven't seen it recently, but I've seen plenty of people on Twitter, on social media, who have said, yeah, Amy Klobuchar is so awesome. Like, I saw that, like, I think it was 3-4 months ago. It was kind of in the beginning of the primary, maybe even before the primary really even gets started. And everybody, people were like, putting out these polls and like, yeah, how about Klobuchar and Kamala Harris? Yeah, awesome ticket right there. And then, strong, powerful women. And it's like, oh my God, like, could you people be any more insane and out of touch with your choices? And then, in another part of the debate, she was talking about how, these are the ideas. I think she even mentioned it there. My ideas are the ones that the people want and the country is looking for. But then that begs the question, then why are you only polling at 1%? Kyle Kalinske of Secular Talk made this argument, and he's absolutely right. How are you only 1% if the entire country is just fucking begging and having a big desire for your ideas? Obviously your ideas suck, and you're not advocating for anything that anybody really wants. You're just going out there and just making stupid noises with your mouth and thinking that you sound inspiring and edgy and really kind of like, inspiring people. You're not inspiring anybody. You're only inspiring the the handful of people that know you, the negative 7 people out there that are even going to even vote for you. And you're not going to get anybody's vote. Now, whatever she's done in the Senate or whatever is fine. She's whatever. She's, like I said, she pushed for the lowering of the drug prices for drugs that come from Canada. That's great. And she teamed with Bernie Sanders on that. I think Bernie Sanders complimented her on in an interview regarding that, or at least complimented her, not on that specific policy, but that specific legislation. But he has complimented her in the past, but he shouldn't, honestly. Bernie needs to stop playing footsie with the other corporate Democrats. It's not to his benefit, and especially when it comes to somebody like Amy Klobuchar, who's totally just out of touch and boring, and she doesn't have anything of value to add to any kind of democratic debate. But that's the thing. She thinks she's really edgy. She thinks she has something to deliver, and she thinks that, pushing some moderate moderate and just kind of out of touch, out of date, really, policies that nobody in this day and age really wants. Nobody wants to push for. Nobody wants a public option. Nobody wants what is truly a centrist position. Or I would say generally centrist position, because the progressives are the ones that believe in Medicare-for-all. But then you can also make the case that the people in the country, people in the country, the majority of the people in the country support Medicare-for-all more than anything, more than Obamacare. They would prefer to give up their insurance if they could get Medicare-for-all and then keep their doctors. So people support Medicare-for-all. So, but it's not a centrist position. It's a progressive position. The centrist position among the party, not the people, among the party is the public option and stuff like that. Some derivative of that. But the Medicare-for-all is what the people in the United States want. Is what majority of people in the country want. So technically, you can call that position. You can call that idea centrist. If you ask people all around the world, the idea of Medicare-for-all is centrist because it's just the logical thing to do, to have people get healthcare for all, to get access to healthcare, not just access, but to get healthcare. Because access is a bullshit line that they use. Access to healthcare. No, you don't need. Everybody has access to healthcare. You're talking about the idea of getting healthcare. So the idea of getting healthcare, nobody has that issue in UK, Canada, Scandinavia, Germany, France, all these countries. They're all getting healthcare, and they don't have to worry about the access. They get it. It's put into their it's funded by the taxpayers, and then they get it when they need it. If you go and break a leg, if you need stitches or something, whatever it is, it's the smallest thing, you're going to get it. And that's the great thing about these policies, and the fact that people in other countries love it, and they talk about how wonderful it is, but then people in America, well, particularly our politicians, but then even a lot of voters are totally misinformed on what the country actually wants, because there are idiots out there that believe the politicians are like, no, yeah, Medicare for all, totally radical. How are you going to pay for it? When in reality, it's the current healthcare system that is ridiculously high, and the number of people in this country, 45,000 people die every single year from lack of healthcare. And I mean, that number right there that's worse than gun violence. The number of people that die from guns every year is 32,000 people a year. 45,000 people are dying from lack of healthcare. That's 13,000, little less than 13,000. Maybe around 12 or 13,000 more than people are dying from guns. Now that doesn't mean gun deaths are not a big deal. I'm just saying that when it comes to something that is it shouldn't be a partisan issue. The idea of life and to be able to have a better quality of that life, that's something that should be something that it shouldn't be a partisan issue. It should be an issue that everybody is joining together on. I mean, the idea of guns is, okay, whatever, right-wingers, Republicans, conservatives love their guns. Like, that's something that people can debate on. I mean, obviously, the idea that the whole rate of homicides and, mass shootings and stuff is terrible too, but it seems like no matter what, Republicans and right-wingers and conservatives, they're going to love their guns no matter what. But when it comes to the issue of healthcare, something that, people should be able to have just so they can stay alive, to be able to do that in other countries, and in this country, people just die. That's horrible. And Amy Klobuchar, I'm sure, pretends to care about that a lot, and I honestly don't believe she does, because she's not doing anything to actually fix the issue, because she only wants to go she only basically wants to only do like halfway. She just wants to go halfway the route and go to public option, and then think that's going to be some sort of winning issue that everybody's going to get inspired by. But trust me, Amy, nobody's inspired by you. Nobody thinks you're going to be president, and in a couple of weeks, I guarantee you're not even going to be in the running anymore. So another one of the losers that I was very, very happy to see lost was Kamala Harris. And Kamala Harris is somebody that was, she was being fawned over. She's always been kind of fawned over ever since she's came into the Senate in 2016. But when she decided to run for president, everybody was falling over themselves, coming all over themselves. Oh my God, Kamala Harris is so fucking amazing. She's so wonderful. She's so this, she's so that. What policies did they support for her? Who knows? They just loved her because she's a woman of color, and she's a woman, and she's a Democrat, and she sounds really inspiring, and she's a prosecutor, which to progressives is ridiculous because she's basically a cop. But to the other people out there, the Democrat loyalists essentially, she's like, oh, she's so strong, she's so powerful, and she's so, the way she does, the way she makes her statements, she sounds so strong, and she's totally going to be able to take on Trump, and she's gonna steamroll him because he's a weak little bitch, and then she's going to be able to show how strong a woman can be when taking on Donald Trump. Apparently that didn't work out too well for Hillary Clinton, who basically had the same mentality, and which shows that obviously it's the policies that matter, stupid, not the fucking gender or skin color or anything like that, or let alone the profession, being a prosecutor. Who gives a fuck? But anyway, so she was asked about the issue of free trade during the debate, and she gave a ridiculous take here. I wanted to play this for you guys, and why don't you check this out, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
Senator Harris, how would your trade policy differ from President Obama's?
Well, first of all, I have no criticism of that more than just looking at where we are now, which is that we've got a guy in the White House who has been erratic on trade policy. He conducts trade policy by tweet, frankly, born out of his fragile ego. It has resulted in farmers in Iowa with soybeans rotting in bins, looking at bankruptcy. When we look at this issue, my trade policy under a Harris administration is always going to be about saying we need to export American products, not American jobs. And to do that, we have to have a meaningful trade policy. I am not a protectionist Democrat. Look, we need to sell our stuff, and that means we need to sell it to people overseas. That means we need trade policies that allow that to happen. You asked earlier about China. It's a complicated relationship. We have to hold China accountable. They steal our products, including our intellectual property. They dump substandard products into our economy. They need to be held accountable. We also need to partner with China on climate and the crisis that presents. We need to partner with China on the issue of North Korea. I am on, and I think the only person on this stage, the Senate Intelligence Committee and the Senate Homeland Security Committee. We need a partner on the issue of North Korea. But the bottom line is this: Donald Trump, in office on trade policy, he reminds me of that guy in The Wizard of Oz, when you pull back the curtain, it's a really small dude.
okay? I'm not even going to take the bait, Senator Harris.
Yeah, real funny. I don't even know what the fuck you're talking about. I haven't seen The Wizard of Oz since I was like 5 years old, so I have no idea what the fuck she's saying. I guess she's saying that Donald Trump has a small man syndrome. I guess, I don't know. He's a pretty tall guy, so I mean, I guess deep down he does have a kind of an inferiority complex, and but I mean, yeah, that's a typical terrible Democrat response there. And first of all, she says, "Oh, I'm not a protectionist Democrat." Yeah, because I don't believe in, I totally want to keep jobs in the United States. And then look at the beginning. She says, I don't disagree much with what President Obama was doing on this issue. Okay, so, but you're saying the same exact things as any other Democrat would say. You're not saying anything about about for example, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that existed under President Obama, or at least he was pushing. He luckily never got implemented. This was something that Bernie Sanders was fighting really hard against, and she's basically saying like, oh no, I don't disagree with anything that Obama did on trade. So what are you doing? So how are you pushing for something that's different? But that's the thing. She's not pushing for anything that's different. She's pushing for the same kind of bullshit, the same kind of, neoliberal, corporatist, centrist ideas. And, when she goes, so she's trying to make this whole issue about Trump. And by the way, throughout the debate, she was trying to make this whole thing about Trump. I think out of all the candidates that were running, and even the candidates that say we need to defeat Donald Trump, out of all the candidates that were, mentioning Trump, she was by far the one that was focusing on them the most, and it made zero sense. And I mentioned on Twitter during the debate, why do you keep mentioning Donald Trump? You're not running against Donald Trump yet. You're running in a primary, and this is somebody that, claimed after Tulsi Gabbard called her out and destroyed her on her, on her pathetic, basically fascist prosecutorial record when she was Attorney General, and when she was DA in San Francisco, she, Tulsi Gabbard called her out, and then after the debate, when they were asking her about what Tulsi Gabbard was saying as far as like Tulsi's criticism of her, she was like, "Oh, I'm a top tier candidate," and all the people that aren't in the same position in the polls, essentially aren't in the same tier as I am, they're going to try and come after the big dogs. Well, guess what's happening now, Kamala? You're diving big time. You're diving big time in the polls right now. She's like down to like, I think 6 or 7% in a lot of polls. Before she was, I think somewhere in the 13, 14%. So she's dropped by at least 50% in the polls. And again, like I said at the beginning of the segment, everybody was fawning over her from the beginning of this segment. I'm sorry, since the beginning of this primary, let alone even before that, before she even declared they were loving Kamala Harris. So, but she goes in there and she gives like zero details. She mentions everything about, oh, this is what Trump's doing bad. This is what Trump's doing bad. This Trump, he negotiates our trade policies based on tweet. It's like she's trying to come up with these one-liners, and then you can see that she tried to do that at the end, mentioning the whole Wizard of Oz thing and pulling the curtain, and it's a small guy or whatever. Like, you're not edgy. You're not saying anything that's fascinating anybody. You're just saying a bunch of things that you think like the millennials are like they're totally gonna love, and like honestly mentioning Wizard of Oz is it's so old school. Like, that's Wizard of Oz is a terribly old movie. I mean, even like I said, I haven't watched that movie since I was a little kid, but it's still like it's a movie from like the 40s or 50s? I mean, I don't know why she's even bringing that up, but she's trying to come up with like these one-liners, like these zingers to get at Trump, so as to like so I think what she wants to do is she wants to get Trump's attention so that he tweets about her, and then it creates like some sort of like Twitter firestorm, and then everybody's talking about Kamala Harris. So she wants to get attention by goading Trump, by kind of poking him and prodding him, and then hoping that he'll respond. And then if he doesn't respond, I mean, I guess she figures, well, whatever, I tried. But honestly, that's not going to make you look much better, because you're not going out there and putting out any kind of substance. You're not putting out any kind of ideas. And throughout the debate, she was constantly just like looking ridiculous. There was another part of the debate where she actually got Tulsi'd by the one of the moderators, one of the female moderators. And honestly, if you put Tulsi up next, a picture next to Tulsi next to this female moderator, they look exactly, they almost looked alike. It almost looked like it was Tulsi at that, sitting there, asking her these questions, because she was bringing up Kamala's prosecutorial record and her time as, district attorney and stuff. And she was nailing her, and Kamala had zero response in that. She just went out there and said, "Oh yeah, my record has always been in favor of helping people that need to be helped, and I stand up for people, and I believe in the law, and under a Kamala Harris whatever presidency or administration, I'm going to be standing up for everybody." Yeah, like, you don't even mention anything about the time that you as Attorney General, you locked up people, locked up, I think, a lot of black men. Actually, you locked up black men for smoking weed, for I think in many cases even selling marijuana. You held what was it? You refused to disclose information from certain cases, from people that were on death row. You got certain types of information about somebody that was being accused of a crime, and then you refused to hear it, and then you kept that person in jail or on whatever death row or whatever it was, but you refused to listen to evidence, literal evidence that's brought to you. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do as a lawyer and a prosecutor. You're supposed to look at evidence and then make a decision. Okay, this is I'm going to make this decision, or I'm going to decide whether to prosecute or not prosecute, based on the evidence that I have here. She refused to take a lot of the evidence that she was given, because she wanted to, I don't know, I guess in her mind, she was being tough on crime, and she wanted to make it seem as if she was doing something that people would be like, totally like, wow, good job. You're a tough, negotiator, and you're a tough, you're going after the bad guys, and this is something that Kamala mentioned. What was it? I think Kamala, or maybe one of her supporters, mentioned it. She's like, "Oh, this is a tough, it is really tough to be a prosecutor, because you're supposed to take the mentality of, of being a tough woman, because there's so many tough men out there that expect you to be tough, and they don't want you to be easy on anybody." Okay, then why did you become a prosecutor then? There's a million jobs out there that you could have taken. Why did you go to decide to become a prosecutor? Why don't you become a defense attorney? You could have become a defense attorney. Granted, you could have, there's issues with becoming a defense attorney too. You're defending mass murders and shit. So, but that's fine, whatever. I mean, at least in that regard, you're standing up for somebody's Miranda rights. So the rights to have what you call it, representation by a lawyer, and to by a defense attorney. Right to be silent, and not not have to give any information to the cops when they ask you, before and giving any kind of confessions. You have every right to do what you need to do to at least get a fair trial, essentially. And so, yeah, but my point is that she could have taken any other kind of job. She's going out there and talking about how it's a tough job, or it's like a job where men are expected to be a certain way. So because I'm a woman, I got to be like the men, and I have to live up to their standards or their expectations. That's not true. Go out there, be in the job that you can handle. If you can't handle the job, then that's your problem. That's not everybody else's problem who has to suffer under your reign as Attorney General or DA, when you're going out there and charging them for crimes that they honestly shouldn't have even been charged for, and then putting them in jail for stupid reasons when it comes to selling or smoking marijuana or whatever it is, or any kind of drug. I mean, that's and largely a large part of them being black men, and maybe in some cases even black women. And she is not the kind of candidate that she's not turning out to be the kind of candidate that people expected. Now, before Tulsi Gabbard really called her out, I mean, she was kind of stagnant, but when Tulsi called her out, she's just in free fall mode now. So she's just going in a downward spiral. And this debate proved it. She did not do anything of value, didn't say anything of value in this debate. This question alone was terrible. Like I said, the one where she was called out for her prosecutorial record, it was made her look bad. I mean, she just doesn't have good responses for anything anymore. And it's interesting when, people are talking about how she's this strong, kind of outspoken prosecutor, and I think she was shown for her, what did she do? She pressed, what's his name? Brett Kavanaugh really strong. So when Brett Kavanaugh was going through his nomination process for getting onto the Supreme Court, she apparently nailed him because, he was obviously being accused of sexual harassment and, sexual abuse and stuff against one of the women, was it Christine Blasey Ford, and she apparently nailed him a lot on that. So yeah, I mean, she's good in those cases, but that doesn't mean you could go and become president, and that doesn't mean that necessarily Barack Obama is good, obviously, as president, as he wasn't a very good president when you look at him on a larger scale, and so, trying to go out there and get all these professors and lawyers and prosecutors and stuff like that kind of stuff doesn't fly. And, the downfall of Kamala Harris, honestly, I think another good reason it's for is because of her arrogance. And like I said before, she's talking about how she's, I'm a top tier candidate and I'm somebody that, wants to be taken down by other candidates because they're totally jealous of where I am. I mean, that's classic arrogance from, a politician that you don't want to see, and what turns people off from that kind of, from that kind of essentially rhetoric. You don't want to hear somebody going out there and pretending that as if they're better than everybody. Now, if you go out there and say that my policies are better than X, Y, or Z candidates, that's a different story, and you explain why and you get into the details. That's fine, but that's not what Kamala Harris does. Kamala Harris goes out there and she pretends as if she is a tough prosecutor and thinks that that's a big positive for her. She mentions Donald Trump a bunch of times because she wants to get a reaction out of him, and then when she doesn't end up getting the pop from the audience or the pop from the the advantage in the polls and stuff, she starts to kind of panic, and then she has to play damage control big time. And I think this debate was a big turning point for a lot of candidates, but it was an opportunity for a lot of them to make an impression on the audience and the electorate out there to try and get themselves noticed. And this was not a good showing for Kamala Harris. She did not get herself noticed. If anything, she hurt herself more. She's going to fade into the background even more, just like Amy Klobuchar is. I don't think she's going to fade into the background as fast as Amy Klobuchar. I do believe Kamala is probably going to make it to the next debate, but I wouldn't be surprised if she couldn't. It just kind of depends. I don't think she was the biggest loser in this debate, but she was one of the bigger losers. With I think with her, Amy Klobuchar, Beto O'Rourke, I think, and one other person I forgot. But yeah, she was definitely one of the losers, and she demonstrated it with this question right here. And when it comes to free trade, she obviously has no idea what she's doing. She just wants to support whatever Barack Obama did, and she just wants to ride the coattails of the Democratic establishment because she is part of the Democratic establishment. She's somebody that Hillary Clinton even likes. So she's a classic neoliberal centrist corporate politician, and she wants to go out there and demonstrate that as much as possible, but she wants to pretend to do it with some sort of edge and some sort of strength, prosecutor strength, and that's not playing with anybody, I guarantee it. All right, let's get on to the next segment here. So Bernie Sanders, he was definitely one of the bigger winners of the debate on Thursday night. He kind of just was his classic Bernie Sanders, coming up with a lot of good progressive ideas that people like myself and, I think a good portion of the country supports. But there was one particular issue that he did not shine on very well. And the response to this question, which to be fair was a very loaded question and a very badly framed question, which was no surprise considering majority of the questions from the ABC debate were terrible. The moderators were pretty shitty, like 80 to 90% of the time they were terrible. So Bernie Sanders was asked about the situation in Venezuela by Jorge Ramos. He was asking the questions that were specifically like catering to like Hispanic voters, Latino voters, and so he asked this question about Venezuela. And then I want you guys to listen to Bernie Sanders' response, and it was a very, very bad response. So let's listen to this, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
Vamos a hablar de América Latina. You haven't been asked about Latin America in the previous debate, so let's begin. Senator Sanders, one country where many immigrants are arriving from is Venezuela. A recent UN fact-finding mission found that thousands have been disappeared, tortured, and killed by government forces in Venezuela. You admit that Venezuela does not have free elections, but still you refuse to call Nicolas Maduro un dictador, a dictator. Can you explain why, and what are the main differences between your kind of socialism and the one being imposed in Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua?
Well, first of all, let me be very clear. Anybody who does what Maduro does is a vicious tyrant. What we need now is international and regional cooperation for free elections in Venezuela so that the people of that country can create their own future. In terms of democratic socialism, to equate what goes on in Venezuela with what I believe is extremely unfair. I'll tell you what I believe in terms of democratic socialism. I agree with what goes on in Canada and in Scandinavia, guaranteeing health care to all people as a human right. I believe that the United States should not be the only major country on earth not to provide paid family and medical leave. I believe that every worker in this country deserves a living wage and that we expand the trade union movement. I happen to believe also that what, to me, democratic socialism means is we deal with an issue we do not discuss enough, Jorge, not in the media and not in Congress. You got 3 people in America owning more wealth than the bottom half of this country. You got a handful of billionaires controlling what goes on in Wall Street, the insurance companies, and in the media. Maybe, just maybe, what we should be doing is creating an economy that works for all of us, not 1%. That's my understanding of democratic socialism.
All right, so obviously I don't disagree with what Bernie Sanders said. He's absolutely right about the fact that his idea of democratic socialism is not the same as just kind of the standard kind of concept of socialism that, people, we learned when we were, taking civics courses and government type courses, political science type courses. But, so I like to think that I like the fact that he's mentioning the policies that he supports kind of contrary to what the kind of scary socialism argument is, especially coming from right-wingers. So the way you answer that question, so it's fine. Like, listen, if you want to go out there and you want to have an opinion about Nicolas Maduro being a tyrant, dictator, whatever the fuck you want to say, that's your opinion. Bernie Sanders wants to say that. That's his opinion. I don't think it's to his benefit to say that, but I get why he's saying that. It's the same thing. It's the same thing as Tulsi Gabbard saying that Bashar al-Assad is a tyrant or dictator. So he's kind of taking the same approach as her, in the sense that he doesn't want to alienate regular voters out there who are going to say things. They're going to say things about these candidates, and they're going to be like, oh, this person is too radical, they're too far left. When it comes to talking about these issues, when it comes to talking about socialism and communism, I feel like you need to be sympathetic to the idea that people in certain countries support those ideas, and I'm sure Bernie is, but trying to go out there and talk about how I am nothing like, let's say, Nicolas Maduro, like, okay, we get it, Bernie, you're not like Nicolas Maduro. And, I get that you don't want to, maybe you don't want to, you don't want people like right-wingers and stuff to say that you are, a socialist and you're a communist and Marxist or whatever. And I get it. But at the same time, you could have easily answered that question by saying, listen, Nicolas Maduro was elected democratically elected, just like Bashar al-Assad, democratically elected by his people. He has supporters that do support his positions and what he does and the things that he wants to push for. Same thing with Bashar al-Assad. And obviously you can go out there and you can talk about how Bashar al-Assad is a dictator, and that's what Tulsi Gabbard says and stuff. Honestly, in a lot of cases, she was kind of pressured into saying that. It seems like it's the same case with Bernie Sanders and Maduro. Now, obviously, those are two different kind of candidates, but mainly Bashar al-Assad is an issue for Tulsi because she went and visited and met with Bashar al-Assad and I think his wife too. And so, she's had to respond for that. Now, when it comes to Nicolas Maduro, I don't think it benefits Bernie to go out there and talk about what a tyrant and dictator Maduro is and then try and differentiate his ideas from him as if, just to because what he's doing is he's trying to appease right-wingers and giving into the bait of what they want from him. They want him to go and address this issue and then, flub it, botch it, come up with something, they want to come up with like a clever soundbite that will make him look stupid. And luckily in this regard, he didn't end up looking stupid. I just didn't like his response. Instead of, kind of just saying, okay, he's a democratically elected president. Yes, I disagree with what he's doing to his people, but he does have supporters that love him, that support him in his country. But there should be some situations where, where obviously the United States, of all situations, the United States should not get involved in Venezuela, because right now, under the Trump administration, we're getting involved in Venezuela, and the neocons, and in many cases the neoliberals, are supporting it. And just like they're supporting going into Syria to bomb and overthrow Assad too, they want to do the same thing with Nicolas Maduro. So, Bernie could have easily responded to that by saying, okay, yes, I am a democratic socialist. I am not a socialist like Nicolas Maduro. Me and him and I, would have things some things we disagree on. The dictator tyrant thing I didn't really care for, obviously, but whatever. You can see that too, because maybe he's done some things that are dictatorial and tyrannical. But at the same time, he could have also said that this, so Venezuela, in this regard, Venezuela is being used as a boogeyman, Maduro specifically and Venezuela are being used as boogeymans and as examples for the United States to find another country to invade, bomb, and, overthrow and make into one of our puppet governments, which is pretty much what we've done with Iraq, and we've done with, not really Yemen, and obviously not Syria either. Yemen, we're just bombing the fuck out of right now. But it's just, you don't want to add it to another list of those countries that we're bombing the shit out of and overthrowing and trying to make one into one of our puppet governments. And if Bernie would have added that to his answer, I would have liked his response a lot better. Instead of just saying that Maduro is a dictator and and tyrant and I don't agree with his form of socialism. Like, you could have spun that way. You could have spun that response, you could have spun your answer to that question a hell of a lot better than that, because that was just like a subpar answer at best. I'm being nice, and that's probably because I have largely higher standards. Unlike somebody like Joe Biden, I have higher standards for Bernie Sanders, and I expect better from him. I can't let him give responses that are going to be subpar, because a subpar Bernie Sanders answer is, in my opinion, a bad answer. And that's why I'm covering it. And that's why I'm telling you guys that, this is not a good response. And I'm sure many people would agree with me. Unfortunately, I think there's going to be a lot of people also out there that are, Bernie Sanders supporters that are going to be like, whatever, who cares? Not a big deal. It wasn't a good response, but they're not going to go out and like criticize him because they don't want to shit on Bernie. But you know what? I'm somebody that's coming out there and I'm going to give you the reality and the truth and what I believe. And you guys need to understand that at the end of the day, left-wingers, or just anybody really on the left, shitting on left-wing so-called dictators, or even the likes of Bashar al-Assad to some extent, because he is more of a secular Shia leader, I don't think that's a benefit to the left. Because what ends up happening, it ends up boosting and legitimizing the right-wingers who want to go and, like I said before, overthrow these governments. So whether they want to overthrow Bashar al-Assad, whether they want to overthrow Nicolas Maduro, you're just adding credence to those people. Trust me, you want to add as little credence to no credence to those people when they make these ridiculous arguments and they say these things. And I don't think, I think Bernie is a little bit too paranoid about seeming as if he's pro Nicolas Maduro. And I don't know. I just don't believe that that's going to be the case, because I think I believe that his policies are going to ironically trump all of the other stupid things that people are going to be saying about him. So all the complaints that people are going to be making about how, he's a socialist, he's a Marxist, he's a communist. On the flip side, a lot of people are saying Donald Trump is like he's like Hitler, and he's like whatever dictator you want to throw out there. He's a terrible fascist, which he is a fascist. But they're calling him a Nazi and they're comparing him to Hitler and stuff. Like that stuff only really, in my opinion, it only sympathizes with the most extreme of people, and honestly, it gives a reason for the people on the other side, in this case the right-wingers, to say like, okay, so now we're just going to start comparing dictators to our president, so then they're going to end up doing the same thing to Bernie Sanders, just like which they already do anyway. So what the hell is the point? My point is that you're not reaching any kind of resolution or conclusion when you're just starting to you're starting to compare people to the worst dictators out there. Just find like the worst dictator, Kim Jong-un, or what was it? Mao Zedong or something? I don't know. Some just like random dictators, Mussolini to Hitler, whatever. Just Fidel Castro, Hugo Chavez. People like, you just throw out all these different, what they consider, what people consider dictators. I'm talking about Democrats consider dictators, and you attack them, and you end up shitting on the side of the political spectrum that honestly you shouldn't be doing it. And I just think it's a major misstep for Bernie Sanders. And I think in my opinion, as long as he focuses on the policies, progressive, social democratic policies, the same ones that he mentioned in that response, as long as he focuses on that, he doesn't need to worry. And when it comes to responding to questions regarding Nicolas Maduro, just go out there and say, listen, yeah, okay, fine, whatever. He's a dictator. I don't agree with that, but he can say that. I understand he has to take that position, but he has to also say, listen, there's people in Venezuela, because there is, and if you ask people like Abby Martin, who's a great reporter, I think, was it Max Blumenthal? I think it was Max Blumenthal. That was another person. There was a couple of other. There was multiple left wingers, but Abby Martin was one of the main ones. Who's the other one? I'll remember it in a second. If not, I'll put it up on the screen so you guys can kind of check him out. But there's multiple left-wing, commentators and journalists out there that have went to Venezuela and spoken to Venezuelan citizens and asked them about their opinions on Maduro. And they love him and they like him. They support what he's doing, even if he's not like the perfect leader. Yeah, he's doing things that are dictatorial and tyrannical, but they still support his policies because he's a socialist left-wing politician. He's a socialist left-wing president, and they support him on those things. So my point is that you have to try and look at these kind of characterizations of these leaders in different countries in a more fair manner, and especially when it comes to Democrats criticizing those left-wing politicians in those countries, they have to be smarter in how they address those people. And in my opinion, you're much better off if you're Bernie Sanders to admit the fact that Maduro was democratically elected. Yes, he's a tyrannical, whatever, dictator, whatever, but he was democratically elected. He has supporters out there. He is a socialist. He pushes for ideas that that I'm pushing for example, health, single payer healthcare for all, universal childcare, universal education, et cetera, et cetera. Now when it comes to other economic issues like, obviously like, wages and stuff, I'm sure those, kind of dictator type countries they're obviously not very good, because that's kind of always been an issue with, obviously with any kind of dictatorship. They treat their people like slaves essentially. So yeah, and so that's fine. Those are I think that's the best way to answer it. And the criticisms like that, like I mentioned, are perfectly fine criticisms to make, but you also have to couple it with giving credit to them for pushing for left-wing ideas that a good portion of people on the left support, and Bernie Sanders represents the left. And I think he would be much better off answering it in that kind of way. So recently, Bernie Sanders came out with another great idea, and this time it is to put an end to medical debt, to eliminate medical debt. And the article here that I'm going to read from you guys, it's a short one. It's from Reuters.com. And the title of the article says, Bernie Sanders proposes canceling $81 billion in U.S. medical debt. So all the debt that people have racked up from, whatever kind of, healthcare costs they've had to pay, that's something that Bernie Sanders wants to address. And it's the perfect thing, coupled with his idea of canceling student debt, and then obviously, pushing for, other essentially policies, but that specifically these are debt-related issues. But pushing for any kind of ideas that help people that are, poor, middle class, that have to pay all this money for their medical costs, and in the other case, student debt costs. These people can't afford this kind of debt, and Bernie Sanders wants to cancel it. And that is a very valiant and wonderful thing for him to do. It's a progressive thing for him to do, and it's great for him to great for him to do that. And I think it's gonna go over very very positively among the left wingers in this country. So let me read different parts of this article here, and then we'll discuss it as we go along. So it says, U.S. presidential contender Bernie Sanders proposed a plan on Saturday to cancel $81 billion in existing past due medical debt for Americans, but offered no details on how it would be financed. Well, it's going to be it's most likely going to be financed through taxing. I would say probably taxing Wall Street, taxing big corporations. Well, in the case of taxing Wall Street, it's essentially to tax trade. So different like stock trade. So if you make a transaction, essentially, you make a transaction on Wall Street, that's going to be charged. So that's how he wants to fund student loan debt, and then canceling student loan debt. So I'm guessing he's probably going to do the same thing when it comes to medical debt. So my assumption is that he's probably going to give more details later on, and this is kind of just like a precursor to what he's eventually going to do. And he's going to end up when he gives more of the details, he's going to add it to his platform. So continues on here. It says, Sanders, an independent U.S. senator from Vermont, said in a statement that under his plan, the government would negotiate and pay off past due medical bills that have been reported to credit agencies. The proposal, he said, would also repeal some elements of the 2005 bankruptcy reform bill and allow other existing and future medical debt to be discharged. quoting him here, it says, "In the United States of America, your financial life and future should not be destroyed because you or a member of your family gets sick," said Sanders. "That is unacceptable. I am sick and tired of seeing over 500,000 Americans declare bankruptcy each year because they cannot pay off the outrageous cost of a medical emergency or a hospital stay." And then it continues on here. It's saying, according to Sanders, medical debt is the leading cause of consumer bankruptcy, with more than 500,000 Americans filing due to medical expenses each year. Wow, that's huge. He said the 2005 bankruptcy reform bill made it difficult to discharge medical debt by imposing strict means tests and eliminated fundamental consumer protections for Americans. It also trapped families with medical debt in long-term poverty, mandated that they pay for credit counseling before filing for bankruptcy, and increased the need for expensive legal services when filing a case for medical bankruptcy, the senator said. So that was a quote from that last part. Yeah, so that's, that's obviously a great thing. Bernie Sanders is not somebody that wants to, as many of you know, and as he said before, many of his supporters have repeated this, but he's not in favor of any middle ground. He doesn't want to push for any kind of middle ground policies. And this is a speech he gave in California. I believe it was the California Democratic Convention, I believe. This was a couple of months ago. I covered it for my podcast. But he went out there and he said, no middle ground, no middle ground. He said on every single issue, no middle ground. And when it comes to an issue like this, when it comes to an issue, as I said before, student loan debt, there is no middle ground. And when it comes to Medicare-for-all, when it comes to, specifically paying for healthcare, for the healthcare for Americans, no middle ground. When it comes to living wage, no middle ground. Bernie Sanders wants to do everything to push the spectrum, the political spectrum of this country as far left as he can. Because right now, our political spectrum is so far right. It's just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, just take the idea of the fact that we are in 8 different wars right now. We are in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, Yemen, Syria. What's the other one I'm missing? Syria. Niger was the 8th one I was going to say, but there's another one before that. I'm missing one of them. See, it's so many you can't even keep track of them. It's so hard to count all these countries, and I hope, God forbid, Iran, it doesn't get added onto that list under a Trump administration, but that's just one example of how our political spectrum is so far to the right, because this whole mentality of like, oh yeah, it's totally cool that we're in 8 different wars. Who cares? Big deal. It's not that big. We got to go and fight the terrorists. So the mentality of the people in this country is that pushing for right-wing ideas like wars, like, cutting taxes. Oh, how are you going to pay for things? But then you can go and pay for all the tax breaks that you're going to give to the millions and the billionaires. That's perfectly okay. But when you want to go and, for example, cancel medical debt, or you would cancel student loan debt, that's like ridiculous. Oh my God, that is terrible. That is such a radical and outrageous idea to come up with. Even though it's literally going to help millions upon millions of people who are suffering from that debt. Now you can make the case that, okay, maybe people shouldn't have gotten into debt in the first place, but that's ridiculous, because the reason people are in debt is because the creditors, they give loan this money to these to regular people out there. They end up charging them so fucking high in interest rates that people aren't able to pay them off. And I mean, what do you think was, one of the reasons why the subprime mortgage crisis started and the Great Recession? Because people were given toxic loans and then they weren't able to pay them off because the interest rates were so high and they had to pay off so much fucking money that it was unaffordable. They just couldn't do it anymore. Can you blame them? I mean, can you blame people for not being able to pay off the additional money in interest rates that that these banks are charging them, and these essentially these loan sharks and stuff? I mean, it's really just the mentality of people in this country, and I'm talking about specifically rich, I'm talking about politicians, I'm talking about media figures. I mean, just look at how terrible our media is. Look at the kind of questions our media asks, as we just covered with the debate. I mean, the kind of mentality that the super rich and the elitist in this country have is so unbelievably obscene and disgusting, and they don't get called out for it. They don't get called out for pushing for things that honestly are ridiculous, and that people in other countries would be just like, what is going on? How are Americans living like this when they can't even pay off student loans, let alone the fact that they even have to pay student loans, the fact that they have to pay that back. They don't just get a free education like you do in all the, European countries, Scandinavia, to some extent Canada, UK. Yeah, same with, debt, medical debt, same exact thing. Like, medical bankruptcy shouldn't even be a fucking issue. In every other industrialized country and every other industrialized nation, it is not an issue. It is an issue in this nation, in this country. And that is a fucking travesty. And that should not be something that people just ignore and put off to the side and be like, oh, well, big deal. Whatever. And believe it or not, there are people that are considered regular people like you and me, and they, whether they're on the Republican side or Democratic side, they see that as oh, well, whatever, tough break. That's what you got to deal with. That's life. They literally look at it like that. But then these are also the people that talk about, oh, well, yeah, I'm totally in favor of universal health care. But then when you see a candidate like Bernie Sanders, who is the only politician pushing for a legitimate universal health care, single-payer system, whenever they see somebody like that pushing for it, they're like, oh, ew, I can't stand him. He's too radical. He's too far left. He's too left-wing. He's too, whatever. And then you have to ask right-wingers, too communist. He's a communist. He's a socialist. He's a Marxist. I mean, it goes on and on and on with the stupidity of people that just are out of touch, and in reality, they're actually living life just like every other regular human being is out there, where they have debt and they have medical. They're getting to medical bankruptcy or just regular bankruptcy in general. They're living. A lot of people are living on the street. Living paycheck to paycheck. They're making less than $30,000 a year, which 75, I think, 3/4 of Americans in this country are making less than $30,000 a year. I mean, that's crazy. That is an unbelievable statistic. And the people that are calling themselves quote unquote Democrats that let that go by and just pretend as if it's nothing, I don't know. How are you a Democrat? But see, that's the problem. The spectrum of this country has tilted, not even tilted, it's just completely done a complete, it's overturned. It's a complete 180 to become so right-wing that right-wing ideas are considered in some cases not liberal, but they're considered democratic ideas, So for example, if you want to take the issue of immigration, so, oh yeah, let's put up a border wall. What's his name, Donald Trump, obviously, he wants to do a border wall. Democrats, their idea, their response is, okay, fine, we'll do the border wall, but give more protections to immigrants that are captured in detention centers, for example. Of course, they don't end up making that happen, but that's what they want. And then obviously Trump doesn't give them the protections for the immigrants that are kept in detention centers and kids that are kept in cages. But my point is that Democrats still are pushing for a border wall. So a border wall is not going to stop people from coming over. That's not how it works, ICE agents going and, just raiding somebody's house, raiding the house of an immigrant that, apparently is in the United States illegally. Apparently that's a wonderful thing, and they do wonderful work. But let's just not fund them as much. You know what I'm saying? Like, in the idea of neoliberals and corporate Democrats, they feel the need like, we should just slightly, defund, or not defund, but slightly fund these agencies less, or let's just get out of Afghanistan. So when it comes to foreign policy, let's just get out of Afghanistan and maybe Iraq, but that's it. So like in their mind, no, let's keep bombing Syria, let's keep bombing Yemen, let's keep bombing, Pakistan, Somalia, Niger, whatever. Like the idea of the kind of typical neoliberal politicians or even voters out there, corporatist, pro-democrat voters out there, is to support policies that are just not far left enough, when in reality you should, because our country and our spectrum is so far to the right. So you should support the policies that are further left. Like I said before, when it comes to Medicare-for-all, you should support a policy that is as far left as possible, so that maybe you can get a better middle ground, so that instead of pushing for what is the actual middle ground, so instead of pushing for middle ground, you will get an actual, at best, if you push for the furthest left policy, maybe you'll actually get that middle ground. Instead of pushing for the middle ground and then fighting against the right wingers and then pushing for a middle ground, then you'll end up, in that way, you'll end up getting like still a right wing policy, essentially. So at least if you push for the furthest right policy, you might actually get the actual middle ground. So obviously a lot of Democrats, corporatists, neoliberals don't get this mentality, this strategy, this mentality does not register in their minds. They don't get that. They don't get that you need to go out there and advocate for the policies that you believe in the most. And instead of believing when people say, this is fairy dust and unicorns and, you guys just want a bunch of ponies and stuff. Like, no, we're pushing for policies that are going to help people live their life, not going bankrupt, not dying, being able to survive without having to, essentially live on the street. So you can actually live in a home and sleep in your own bed at night, especially if you have kids, be able to raise your kids right, and these are basic things, again, that exist in other industrialized nations, not in this nation. In this nation, we are forced to accept the fact that we all have to suffer suffer under the reign of corporate oligarchs and plutocrats who are super fucking rich and have to keep getting their tax cuts as we fucking don't get shit. We don't get nothing. We don't even get breadcrumbs. We're the ones who are supposed to suffer, as they're the ones that are thriving and living their lives wonderfully. And that's terrible. That is not something that should exist in this country. It's shameful. It's shameful that is the way that we are living in this country. And until you have somebody like Bernie Sanders and politicians out there like himself, getting into office that are pushing for those things, until we have those people getting in there and existing in our political landscape, then we're not going to get anywhere. And we're going to stay stuck where we are, and we're going to keep having Trump, or even possibly get even somebody worse than Trump, which is almost unimaginable. But if that's what people want, if they want more Trump, then they should go and support somebody that is not Bernie Sanders. And trust me, that's what they're doing. They're going out and supporting anyone that's not Bernie Sanders out there, because they think that Bernie Sanders is too radical. We're talking about Democrats here. So it's unbelievable how these people think, and I'm never going to understand it. And progressives out there, we have to fight tooth and nail to make sure these kind of things are going to happen, and if we don't, we're going to end up getting nowhere in this country. So the next story here is going to be about Elizabeth Warren and Hillary Clinton still being BFFs and still remaining in contact with each other, still, still basically, well, in this case, I guess, Elizabeth Warren still heeding the advice of Hillary Clinton. Elizabeth Warren trying to, essentially, I mean, she wants to get the voters, the Hillary Clinton voters. I mentioned this before. She's trying to get those Hillary Clinton voters from 2016, the Hillary diehards that are still pissed about Bernie Sanders supposedly screwing over Hillary Clinton, even though he campaigned for her, just because he had the gall and the unmitigated gall to criticize Hillary Clinton for legitimate reasons and challenge her in the primary. They want to get back at Bernie by pushing for somebody like Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris. Like I said earlier, Kamala Harris is probably not looking too good. But they would love Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren to them is like that's a compromise choice, And even though at one point Elizabeth Warren was considered too far left, and I covered in past podcasts how Elizabeth Warren is coming off as much more palatable to CEOs, so the heads of multinational corporations, big banks, CEOs and stuff. So it's becoming a problem. But the fact that she is still in contact with Hillary Clinton and possibly still getting advice and tips and getting tips and advice and stuff from from Hillary Clinton, that's a problem. I mean, that's something that people should be really, really worried about, because this is somebody that lost to Donald Trump. This is somebody that obviously did not learn her lesson, because she keeps pushing for the same, keeps pushing for like the same, she's still pushing the same talking points about Russia and pushing for all that, bullshit, fear-mongering Russiagate shit, and talking about how, the election was stolen from her, and, we need to go and, talking about Bernie bros and stuff. I don't know, just a bunch of shit. It's so hard to keep track of all the ridiculous, accusations that Hillary Clinton has made against progressives and just kind of like anybody that doesn't bend at her will, essentially, And she obviously doesn't like to be I guess talked down to, if you want to put it that way, but she basically doesn't want to be challenged, and she loves the idea when politicians are kissing her ass, and that's what Elizabeth Warren is doing, and that's why it's a big issue. With all that said, I wanted to get into this article about how they are, keeping in contact and talking and, kind of maintaining that relationship, especially after Elizabeth Warren endorsed Hillary over Bernie Sanders. So essentially, at some point, you can definitely expect that that Elizabeth Warren is going to try and get Hillary's support, which is honestly, it's a horrible decision, considering the fact that Hillary Clinton is terribly unpopular. She lost to Donald Trump, regardless of how many more millions of votes she got. What was it, 3 million or however, almost 3 million votes that she got than Donald Trump. She's still terribly unliked throughout the country. And but let's get into this article here, and then we'll talk about it as we go along. So the title of this article, it's from NBCnews.com. The title is "Warren and Clinton Talk Behind the Scenes as 2020 Race Intensifies," and the article is written by Jonathan Allen. I think Jonathan Allen used to write for Politico before, so it's these kind of articles. When they're written by these guys, they usually have the same kind of tone, corporate tone to them. So let's check it out here. It says Elizabeth Warren's team doesn't want to talk about Hillary Clinton, but that doesn't mean the 2020 presidential candidate isn't talking with her party's 2016 nominee. The two women have kept a line of communication open since the Massachusetts senator decided to run for president, though only a conversation around the time of Warren's launch has been previously reported, according to several people familiar with their discussions who spoke to NBC on the condition of anonymity because of the political sensitivity of private interactions. It's hard, and then the next part says, it's hard to know exactly how many times they've reached out to each other or precisely what they've discussed, in part because neither camp wants to reveal much of anything about their interaction, and in part because they have each other's phone numbers, and there are many ways for two high-powered politicians to communicate that don't involve their staffs. So, in my opinion, I guarantee you they've talked much more than once. If I were to put a number on it, I would have to say at least, I think I'm trying to be too nice. I was going to say 5. I want to say at least 10 times. I'll be nice and say 5 to 10 times. That's the least I can say. At least 5 or 10 times. If it's more than that, yeah, I definitely wouldn't be surprised. And that's only because, like I said, she wants to get the support of Hillary Clinton so that she can get her supporters. So she wants to get those Hillary diehards from 2016, and she knows that that's a big factor in, obviously getting that neoliberal Democrat loyalist vote. So continuing on here, it says Clinton is a fraught subject for the Democratic contenders, perhaps for none so much as Warren, who in the shadow of Clinton's defeat is seeking to become the second woman to win the party's nod and the first woman elected president. As she seeks to blend her movement-based progressive campaign with the Democratic establishment long wary of her populist brand of politics, Warren has been maintaining and creating relationships with a wide array of Democratic establishment figures. And if the race for nomination goes long, as many Democrats now predict, Clinton could become pivotal as an ally, an adversary, or a neutral observer. I got to tell you, she's definitely not good as an ally for anybody. I mean, I even hope that Hillary Clinton doesn't support Bernie Sanders. If she supports Bernie Sanders, I'll be like, oh, goddamn. I mean, I think honestly, a lot of progressives might, maybe not progressive, not like loyal Bernie supporters, but like people that are like even weary of Bernie Sanders are going to be like, what? Hillary Clinton is supporting him? I don't know if I want to, maybe he buckled to some sort of pressure or something. People are going to get paranoid, and understandably they're going to get paranoid, and they're going to think that he gave into some sort of demand that she's asking for, because to be fair, Hillary Clinton and the DNC gave into a lot of demands that Bernie Sanders was pushing for when he was trying to get the Democratic platform in 2016 to include like more progressive policies and stuff, which was what Bernie was fighting for, especially among the DNC, and like kind of reforming the DNC's corrupt system. But since he was pushing for that, yeah, I would totally see the fact that he pushed for that in 2016, that people would suspect that she pushed for that if she ended up endorsing Bernie. Now, if she doesn't endorse Bernie, if Bernie is the nominee, people will be like, oh, yeah, great, wonderful. You don't have to hear about Hillary Clinton anymore. And I guarantee you, Hillary Clinton campaigning for Bernie Sanders would be a terrible idea. That would be something that Bernie Sanders, I think, would even, honestly, I think he would probably deny. But I also fear that possibly his strategists and advisors would possibly tell him, like, no, let Hillary campaign for you. It's okay. No, Bernie needs to turn that shit down. I don't know if he's going to, but he definitely needs to. So continuing on here, it says, more immediately, Warren would no doubt like to win over support from Clinton voters, particularly women and women of color, as she battles Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, former Vice President Joe Biden, and the rest of a field that trails the top-tier what is this word? Triumvirate? Never heard of that word. Yeah, so, and I should note that the support that Elizabeth Warren has among just people of color, I don't know about women of color, but people of color is very, very low. I think she has maybe like 29% support from people of color. Now, because they are women, possibly the women of color support her more. I don't know. That's just my guess. If she got Hillary Clinton support, that support would go up big time. Now, I don't know if they would go up big time among people of color, but just women of color for sure it would. Because she had big support among women of color in 2016. And by the way, on top of that, I should note, Bernie Sanders has big support among people of color. He has, I believe, at least 65 to 70% support from people of color. I'm not sure what the number is for women of color. I think it might be in like the low 60s, but yeah, it's high. It's still high. So it's plenty more than a majority for sure. So, and and obviously the media likes to ignore that. They act like that as if that's not the case, which is crazy, but unsurprising too. So continuing on here, it says, but Warren has made little effort to publicly highlight ties to Clinton, who is perceived by many on the left as too centrist and who was defeated in an election Clinton and her allies believe was heavily colored by President Donald Trump waging a misogynistic campaign. To the extent that Democratic primary voters feel a repeat scenario in 2020, and to the extent that she's competing with Sanders for the votes of progressives, there may be good reason for Warren to keep her distance from Clinton publicly. At the same time, people who know and like both women say there are more similarities between them than some of the partisans would like to admit. That's not a good thing. Each is a policy powerhouse with an uncommon command of details. Oh, come on. Hillary Clinton is a policy powerhouse with an uncommon command of details. Are you kidding me? I mean, okay, you can make that case about Elizabeth Warren. She's definitely very wonky. Hillary Clinton is not a policy powerhouse. That's absolutely absurd. Nobody fucking believes that. Come on. And it says, and possesses the ability to master new material quickly with a deep intellectual curiosity. Who the hell thinks that about Hillary Clinton? I mean, that's crazy. Just listen to her talk. A policy powerhouse and possesses the ability to master new material quickly. As if she's some sort of like intellectual sponge, as if she's like a policy sponge. She just takes everything in. Do they ever say that about Bernie Sanders, who's constantly talking about policy? No, they just say he's loud and rambling and angry. Anyway, it says like Clinton, Warren focused the early part of her campaign on developing a raft of policy proposals and rolling them out. No, that's not true. That's not true for Hillary Clinton. More important, an explicit or implicit blessing from Clinton could help Warren if she finds herself battling for delegates and superdelegates at a contested Democratic convention next summer. Hillary Clinton would absolutely have influence over a number of delegates to this convention, said Deb Kozakowski, the vice chair of the Massachusetts Democratic Party. Massachusetts, of course, is the home state of Elizabeth Warren. Though Warren harshly criticized Clinton's vote for a 2001 overhaul of bankruptcy laws, the two have developed a healthy respect for each other in recent years. When Clinton was developing policies for her own campaign in 2015, her aides kept in close contact with Warren to give her an opportunity to raise concerns before they were rolled out. That's actually pretty hard to believe, considering Hillary Clinton and her staffers are so hell-bent on thinking that they know everything, and that they're, like in this case, she's a policy powerhouse. I'd be surprised that they were taking any of Warren's ideas. If they were taking Warren's ideas that were more neoliberal and centrist, if anything. And if they did take any of her, faux aggressive or progressive policies, they ultimately didn't even commit to them anyway. Continuing on here, it says, Clinton has been impressed with Warren's campaign so far, according to a Democratic strategist who has spoken with her. She has applauded her about being serious and disciplined and loves that she is sticking to her guns, the strategist said, speaking on the condition of anonymity because Clinton's remarks were intended to remain private. Clinton has relationships with most, if not all, of the Democratic candidates, and she met with or spoke to many of them at the start of this campaign cycle. Mayor Pete Buttigieg of South Bend, Indiana, sat down with Clinton in New York several months ago when his star was rising and he needed to clear the air following a report on his criticism of Clinton's campaign. So basically that's a translation for Pete Buttigieg had to go and kiss Clinton's ass and he had to let her know that he totally respects her and loved what she did in her campaign in 2016 and agreed with everything that she did, and she is wonderful because she was the first woman to be nominated for president of the for the Democratic Party, or in general just president, and she is a great candidate, and she's a big influence for women, and blah 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 blah, and a bunch of bullshit. So yeah, that's not surprising. That's not surprising at all for anybody that can see that Pete Buttigieg is a total centrist, corporatist, shill, kiss ass, basically. And then the rest of the paragraph here says, but the contact with Warren appears to have been more than a courtesy call or a trip to the principal's office. Yeah, that's a good way to put it, principal's office. And then it says, with a progressive base behind her, Warren's political need is to make establishment Democrats comfortable with her candidacy. Clinton, whose politics arguably have been closer to Biden's over the course of her career, has deep credibility in those circles. Yeah, that's a very troubling paragraph right there, saying that not only do Warren's political need is to make establishment Democrats more comfortable, which is a oxymoron considering the so-called progressive base behind her. The progressive base is not behind Elizabeth Warren, definitely not as much as they are behind Bernie Sanders. That's what the mainstream media pretend. That's what the mainstream media tries to ignore, or kind of tries to pretend as if it's not the case as much. They like to pretend as if Elizabeth Warren has more progressive support than Bernie Sanders, because she's also willing to take the support of the establishment Democrats. So the people that they think are progressive, they are actually again, they're those grifting resistor types that call themselves progressive, but they're actually just centrist, essentially. So the mainstream media, being the idiots that they are, they think that these centrist idiots are actual progressives when they're not. So, and then they claim, the progressive base that's behind Warren. No, there's no progressive base that's behind Warren. And if it is, it's not as much as Bernie Sanders, for sure. You can take that to the bank. And then saying that Clinton's politics are arguably closer to Biden's is that's just even more. That just says even more about how terrible Joe Biden is, for sure. And then it says, but Clinton and Biden developed a rivalry when they worked in the Obama administration, and as they both prepared for a 2016 campaign that Biden ultimately didn't enter. She also might take into consideration factors other than proximity on policy if she decides to back a candidate at some point. Kozłowski, who's the vice chair of the Massachusetts Democratic Party, Kozłowski, who has not endorsed a presidential candidate, said it would make sense for Clinton to be helpful to one of the women running if she can put her over the top. It would be counterproductive for the first woman nominee of the party to not be supportive of a woman who may go over that threshold, Kozłowski said. So, listen, when it comes to trying to garner the support of the corporate establishment, that's what Hillary Clinton's endorsement would do. It would not help. It would not help the progressive base. It would not help the people that are seeing Elizabeth Warren, worried about her not being progressive enough, and then seeing somebody like Hillary Clinton supporting her. I mean, progressives would flee that scene as fast as possible. They wouldn't want to have anything, and I'm speaking as a progressive who knows a lot of progressives and is in contact with a lot of them. They don't want to have Hillary Clinton involved in anything. And why do you think this whole stuff about Warren and Hillary Clinton being in contact is being kept under wraps? It's being kept behind closed doors because Warren knows that Hillary Clinton is not liked by progressives that are Bernie Sanders supporters, and to Warren's credit, she wants to get the support of Bernie supporters, but she wants to do it by co-opting Bernie's ideas, which is terrible. And it's very clear that she's trying to out Bernie by grifting off of his policies and pretending to support them when in reality she doesn't. And then she just takes his policies and pretends that her ideas are better. Now she doesn't attack Bernie doesn't attack her. But she pretends that her policies are great and they're just like Bernie's, but hers somehow are going to be better because, I don't know, she's more pragmatic, and because she's liked by the establishment. Oh, I got the support of the establishment, and I got the support of the pragmatic establishment and the progressives. Okay, well, that's not going to help you, because look how that worked out for Hillary Clinton. So my fear is that Elizabeth Warren is going to pull a Hillary Clinton, just like she did in 2016. Not as bad as Hillary Clinton, who was just constantly shitting on progressives, whereas Elizabeth Warren seems to be much more kind of conciliatory to progressives, and kind of seems to be catering to progressives much more, which is nice. But at the end of the day, if you're not pushing for the policy that progressives want, then all of that, kissing the ass of progressives doesn't mean anything. And ultimately, it doesn't look like she is going to be pushing for any kind of progressive policies as much as she claims she does on the campaign trail and in the debates and whatever interviews she gives. Elizabeth Warren is not somebody that is going to be the progressive firebrand that she pretended to be back, I don't know how many years ago, 10 years ago, maybe even when she first came into the Senate. So, and she's already left a bad taste in the mouth of progressives for not endorsing Bernie Sanders in 2016, which progressives feel that she should have done, leftists feel that she should have done when Bernie and Hillary Clinton were facing each other in the Massachusetts primary in 2016. People felt that she should have endorsed Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton, and that would have put Bernie over the top. Now, whether or not that would have happened, possibly. And by the way, the race was very, very close. Hillary Clinton ended up winning by like 1 or 2%. So it's not like it was a bad showing by Bernie. I don't know how many delegates that counted for. Probably wasn't too much, but either way, I think it would have probably made some sort of an impact. But ultimately, this is a matter of putting aside delegates and all that shit, and winning races or not. The point is that Elizabeth Warren is is supposed to be a progressive. She kind of portrays herself as one and sells herself as one, but then she goes out there and kisses the ass of the establishment, goes and cozies up with the heads of CEOs of multinational corporations, such as Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase, who's the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, and she's trying to become more palatable to the heads of those big banks and the establishment, and that's something I covered I believe it was the last podcast, and she is doing that. And actually, well, I've covered in many podcasts, but that's one of the things that I brought up. Actually, one of the main things I did bring up in the last podcast was the fact that she declared in 2 separate interviews, one with TYT and one on MSNBC's All In with Chris Hayes. She declared that she is happily willing to take money from super PACs in the general election. So it does not believe in, quote, unilateral disarmament. So she is not against taking super PAC money in the general. So what does that mean? That means that she is willing to cater to progressives in the primary because she needs to get their votes. But then when it comes to the general election, she's going to stave off, ignore and kind of neglect what progressives say and the demands that they make, and be like, oh yeah, well I need to get all the money that is needed, and she says something along the lines of, we're all playing on a level playing field and blah blah blah, and we need to do everything we can to fight Donald Trump, and then this money is going to be used for volunteers on the ground and for the ground game and to get votes out, blah blah blah. It's like that. Nobody fucking believes that, bro. That's bullshit. That is not anything that's not going to convince us. That's not something that's truly going to fly with progressives. So if she thinks she's going to fool us with that shit, it's not going to work. And the fact that she's having conversations with Hillary Clinton and possibly is going to get endorsed by Hillary Clinton if she's running in the general, that means that she's capitulated, and we already know that she's capitulated, but that means she's capitulated to even more policies, and she's even more neoliberal, and she's even more centrist for Hillary Clinton. Otherwise, Hillary Clinton wouldn't have tried to endorse that candidate in this regard being Hillary Clinton. I'm saying in this regard being Elizabeth Warren. So if that candidate was more progressive, I guarantee she would be hesitant to back that person. Again, if she doesn't end up supporting Bernie Sanders, if he's the nominee, that's fine. You can stay out of the way, Hillary. Bernie Sanders does not want your support, does not want you talking on behalf of him and saying how much you want him to be president, because then we're going to have to worry about possibly Bernie Sanders, capitulating to demands of the establishment. And we can't deal with that. That's not something that we're going to put up with. So ultimately, Elizabeth Warren is somebody that we need to really watch out for. We have to keep an eye out for her. We have to keep our eyes peeled and make sure that she doesn't continue selling us a bunch of bullshit and then doing, the complete opposite of what she's promising. Because she's already doing that with taking the PAC money in the general election. She already put that out there. So she's admitting it. She's admitting we're going to take super PAC money in the general election if we're facing Trump. But in the primary, because I want to kiss the ass of progressives, I'm not going to do it. And I guarantee you that's something Hillary Clinton wants. I guarantee you that's what all the main party bosses, Tom Perez and all these people want too. So that's a problem. That's a serious, serious problem. And she needs to stay away from Hillary Clinton as much as possible because she is influencing her big time. And I remember, I think I posted an article on my Facebook page a while back. I think this was before Elizabeth Warren declared, or maybe even right after she declared, but whatever it was, she apparently hired one of Hillary Clinton's old press secretaries or communications directors or something. One of the spokespeople essentially for Hillary Clinton. Elizabeth Warren hired her onto her campaign. I mean, that's a problem. That's a fucking red flag. And this was way back in 2018, or late 2018, but all the way back in 2018. And knowing that she's talking to Hillary and knowing that she wants to take PAC money in the general, I mean, it's just there's more and more evidence of Elizabeth Warren not being trustworthy. And we need to be very, very worried about that. And we need to make sure that Bernie Sanders is the nominee and nobody gets fooled by Elizabeth Warren's games. Because at the end of the day, this is for the sake of our country and for the sake of beating Donald Trump. And Bernie Sanders is the best person to beat Donald Trump, hands down. All right, guys, that's going to be the end of the Progressive Square. Thank you so much for watching. Before we get going here, once again, don't forget to check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/progblacksmith. If you can become a patron and give me a generous contribution, it would be greatly appreciated. Also, remember, if you want more information about this podcast, check out #TheProgSquare on Twitter. That will direct you to all of my live broadcasts on Periscope, as well as every segment I post on YouTube. So thank you again for watching. Take care.